What's going on, guys? Hope you're all doing well. Now, for today's video on Dragoncurve, I wanted to talk about dragons. After the release of Jurassic Park in 1993, computer-generated effects started popping up everywhere in film, particularly for anything that involved creature effects or monsters in its story. With more and more movies adopting this method of effects work for use, technical advancement with CGI happened rapidly, especially from Industrial Light and Magic, which today's movie happens to be a product of. Dragonheart is a 1996 fantasy film directed by Rob Cohen. It starred Dennis Quaid as a disillusioned but still heroic knight, alongside Sir Sean Connery as Draco, the world's last remaining dragon. The movie's plot basically revolves around a corrupt king who at one point in his life had been trained by Bowen, Dennis Quaid's character, who had hoped to teach the young prince in the ways of being as virtuous as a knight. But once a wound to his heart forces the prince's family to turn to a dragon for help, everything kind of builds up to this sort of epic story of sin, punishment, and doing what's right for the greater good that I think helps give the movie a lot of good weight. Now, truth be told, I actually hadn't planned on talking about Dragonheart for a while, and that's because this was actually a movie that I think I had planned to review way back in 2017 when my first channel was more than just about Jurassic Park stuff. But after I started talking to a friend of mine named Shannon, who likes the movie, I figured, you know what the hell, why not rewatch it again? I used to work with her at Domino's, and I hadn't talked to her a while. It was kind of funny that we just started talking about movies all of a sudden, but yeah, this was one of them, and I'm honestly glad I did watch this again, because this movie is a lot of fun, and I think more people should talk about it if I'm being honest. Now, Dragonheart isn't exactly a forgotten or underrated movie by any means, since a lot of people know it exists, and it was actually a pretty popular movie back in the day, but its place in film history, as far as the advancements in CGI go, are kind of understated or left behind for those that weren't really in the loop of how this thing got made. What I mean by that is basically, this was one of the most important films for the advancement of Industrial Light and Magic's computer effects technology after the first Jurassic Park film, and a lot of movies today were kind of built off of the back of this project, which, by the way, went through a ton of changes behind the scenes that I actually didn't know too much about until recently. The idea to make Dragonheart actually dates all the way back to 1988, believe it or not, when Patrick Reed Johnson went to Rafaela de Laurentiis with the idea to do a movie based around the last living dragon and knight, both going around villages conning people for money. While that stuff still exists in the finished film, it's definitely not the heart of the story. Somewhere along the way, the idea of incorporating the Arthurian legend and the ideas of a man's attempt to restore his idealistic ways in a terrible dark world were introduced. I've personally never read that script, but apparently it was so good that it drove many people to tears after they read it and got the green light from Universal in 1990 pretty quickly. Tons of people were offered roles to play Bowen, including Timothy Dalton and Pierce Brosnan, believe it or not, before Qui-Gon Jinn himself, Liam Neeson, was in talks to star. But the studio wanted somebody else and sent the script to Kevin Bacon, Tom Hanks, and even Arnold freaking Schwarzenegger, which I thought was kind of funny to think of. Harrison Ford was in talks to do it at one point. Universal wanted Whoopi Goldberg to voice the dragon. This whole thing got really weird really quick. Bottom line, none of that happened, and the movie we got instead was kind of a more family-friendly fantasy film that added a lot of humor and heart than what I think the original writer intended, as far as, making it more family-friendly. He was kind of disappointed with the final project. Special effects work began while all this stuff was happening, and ILM started work on some test footage for what Draco would look like in the movie. The way they accomplished this was by taking the CGI model of the T-Rex from Jurassic Park, stretching out his neck, and adding wings to make it look like a dragon.
And what we did was we took the T-Rex from Jurassic Park and kind of stretched him out and stretched his mouth out a little bit and changed some things on him and made him look less like a dinosaur and more like a dragon.
I'm not sure if the company had already begun test work for the pteranodons from the Lost World just yet, but I do think these wings look a little similar. The finished product of Draco's wings being illuminated by the sun reminding me of that last scene from the second Jurassic Park, where you see the animal land in a tree, and I always thought of that. Now, the actual look of the dragon would be made after hiring another part of the Jurassic Park team, Phil Tippett took on responsibilities for making Draco's look, storyboarding, and action sequence integration, which paid off pretty well because the dragon in this movie shows up way more than the dinosaurs did in Jurassic Park, so they needed every bit of special help they could get. The film would go on to be known for the first movie to utilize Industrial Light and Magic's caricature software that helped make Sean Connery's words match up to the dragon's lips, which is pretty cool because it's also the first CGI dragon done in a movie with that much detail and realism applied with the visual effects. Anyways, Dragonheart came out in 1996, made $115 million at the box office, and got some mixed to positive reviews from the public. Many people noting that it was basically just a family movie made about an extremely good-looking dragon that was groundbreaking for the time. The film went on to be nominated for an Oscar in the Best Visual Effects department, but it ended up losing to Independence Day, which was a way bigger hit at the time. The music was composed by Randy Edelman, and let me tell you something, guys, it's really good. And even if you've never seen Dragonheart before, you've definitely heard the music after they put it in a ton of movie trailers for stuff like Mulan, and even getting used as the closing credits for the United States Olympic Games. One of my teachers in high school used to mention it being one of the most underrated scores ever made. Personally, I've always liked Dragonheart, although I will admit I always thought that the movie was missing around 20 minutes of extra footage that could have helped build the tension between Bowen and the film's villain even further, and come to find out, I was right, and the original cut of the movie was something like 2 hours and 18 minutes compared to the 1 hour and 43 minutes that they released. Which, by the way, it's crazy to believe that the first cut of the movie, the longer version, was completed and delivered in January of 1995. This means they shot Dragonheart in 1994 and didn't release it until 2 years later, and that's kind of wild to me. But it does sort of make sense once you know that stuff while watching the movie, because Dragonheart feels very 90s, and I always thought it was kind of a bridge between the old ways of making movies and the new. The original writer on the project does seem to still have issues with the movie, particularly the logic and how silly scenes play out, and while I agree, he's definitely right, I still think that what they delivered is extremely memorable and well done. David Thewlis, the guy who would later go on to be that werewolf in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, plays the bad guy with half of the dragon's heart, and he does a good job at being proper evil in the role. Brian Thompson, who was in literally everything around that time, is one of his henchmen. I always remembered him as the alien bounty hunter from the X-Files and Shao Kahn in Mortal Kombat Annihilation. He does a good job, but probably my favorite cast member is Pete Postlethwaite, Roland Timbo himself, showing up as Brother Gilbert, who has a lot of really funny scenes.
Turn the other cheek, brother.
It's really cool to see the range of Pete Postlethwaite, because in one movie he can be a very devout monk who's trying to do his best to be a Christian man, and then the other he's this badass big game hunter trying to kill a male T-Rex. He was an extremely good actor. All in all, Dragonheart is a movie that I think a lot of people will enjoy if they get around to watching it again, especially those who think back to that time when Hollywood would make good, wholesome movies that didn't have any sort of overt political messages or crazed laziness with the storytelling. It's just a fun story about a talking dragon and a disillusioned knight learning to live and die in a corrupt world they've sworn to protect. I really like it. Back in the day, this VHS tape would be all over every video rental store, and the imagery of Sean Connery's dragon flying in front of the sun, and it's a part of that time period that I think back on, and it just makes me smile. Anyways, guys, those are all just my own thoughts on Dragonheart, but hey, what do all of you guys think about it? What do you think of the movie, and what kind of movie do you think they could have made had they followed the original script more closely? Now, whatever your thoughts and opinions on any of that happens to be, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below.